All righty, let's dive in. I am going to flip it over to our presenters today. Take it away, Park Strategies.
Oh, Greg, appreciate it. And we're honored to do this with you and Canna Advisors. Just a brief introduction. I'm Joe Rossi. I've been fortunate to be with Park Strategies for almost 10 years and was recently trusted to chair the cannabis practice group at the firm, along with some awesome colleagues, including Alyssa Snyder.
Yes, I've also been with Park Strategies almost 10 years now. I'm also an attorney, and I went to Albany Law School and also received my MBA. And it's been a pleasure diving into this new area with the task force with Park Strategies. So.
Yeah, well, my name is Greg Huffaker. I was actually working as a commercial litigator in Garden City on Long Island. I went to a CLE at my old law school, Cardozo, in the city about cannabis law, and I was hooked. What I didn't know then, but quickly learned, is that the people in the cannabis industry are like no other profession I've interacted with, and that they really want to help people get into this industry and help everybody thrive. I'm the Director of Client Services at Canna Advisors, and that's what I'm here to talk to you about today. Canna Advisors' story began in Boulder, Colorado, which is a hotbed of innovation and free-spirited ambition. We helped the state of Colorado and its cannabis entrepreneurs create and manage groundbreaking legislation, and as the legal cannabis movement expanded, so did we. State by state, country by country, Canna Advisors helped drive policy and consulted emerging businesses across the world. We formed strong networks of strategic partnerships, like the one we're having today, and we've helped grow this emerging cannabis economy. Few can claim our knowledge or understanding of the industry, and even fewer can claim our influence. All told, we have a combined over 100 years of experience in cannabis. Our team's worked in 31 states, Canada, Europe, Guam, and Puerto Rico. All right, let's dive in with some new news. Alyssa, you want to get us started?
Yes, I'm sure we've all seen, we have Governor Andrew Cuomo's resignation, and we've gotten this question a lot from our clients. What does this mean for the adult use program in New York? Where is this going? What's going to happen? We believe that this is a positive change for the implementation and the development of the program in New York. You'll see some of the tweets on the page here from our upcoming governor, Kathy Hochul. She's been supportive from a practical position, acknowledging the need, obviously, for revenue from the cannabis industry for New York. She's also stressed the importance of the social equity provisions, which are already part of the program. And we know that we believe she's very enthusiastic about getting sales up and running without any more delay. You'll see on the next page, on the next slide, it's an excerpt from Leafly. Here you'll see that it's explaining Governor Cuomo's historical pushback on the legalization of cannabis. And as of today, I think we all have noticed that the Office of Cannabis Management has yet to be staffed. It's kind of been slow moving with him making the appointments. We are hoping and believe that one of the first couple steps that incoming Kathy Hochul will make will be making those appointments. Staffing that office, she can make 2 direct appointments and appoint a chairperson with advice and consent of the Senate. The legislature will appoint the remaining members, and she'll then be able to appoint an executive director. Now, it is very promising, like I said, for the cannabis industry in New York. We're hoping also that this will start to smooth out the process and almost put the timeline for sales in summer of 2022 timeline back on track. And you'll see on the next slide, we have the timeline for New York.
Yeah, New York passed legalization on March 31st, 2021. It was one of the most ambitious cannabis legalization bill in the nation, especially as it relates to social equity. And certain things happened when the governor was done signing that bill. Effective immediately, you could possess up to 3 ounces. That's a lot compared to other states. You're allowed to smoke cannabis anywhere cigarette smoking will be allowed in New York. That includes on sidewalks, on front stoops, other public places. The New York State Fair coming up this week. But once it passed on March 31st, we were anticipating that the appointments would have been made before the New York State legislative session ended on June 10th. Unfortunately, those appointments were not done. The legislature promised there would be a summer recess. Clearly, the Attorney General's report came out and it was an earthquake in Albany. And as Alyssa said, the new governor will be starting on the 24th. We're anticipating that actually is good news for cannabis, in the sense that an impeachment would have paralyzed Albany. And now the train's getting back on track. I'm not a super forecaster or even an amateur forecaster, but I do know that when we were reading the tea leaves in Albany and speaking to the leadership in New York, we're anticipating that those appointments will be done soon, potentially within the next 30 days. Once those appointments are done, we'll start getting those regulations approved by the Cannabis Control Board. Once those regulations are out and the public comments is done, you then get to the application process, a guesstimate, not even like a percentage guesstimate, but a guesstimate is, after the first of the year, those applications will be out. Hopefully that means licenses, what we were hearing, in hands by April. So that's for cultivators, processors, and dispensaries and everybody. So cultivators, processors potentially being able to get rolling in April. In April 1st, 2022 is when the legal cannabis tax program goes into effect, but likely stores wouldn't be opening until October 2022. That is the closest forecasted timeline we have.
All right. So let's talk about the social equity application. I'm going to start by going through a general overview. Then we're going to talk about some of the New York specifics, and then get some great insight from Park Strategies on why it was written this way. So early on, social equity was not a part of legal cannabis. Now, there's some reasons for this that are sort of make sense at the time, but historically, we've obviously come around on, and that's, that we wanted very clean criminal records for the first people starting out, which made sense in the beginning, but really cut out huge numbers of people to even be able to apply early on. This was figured out fairly quickly, and Ohio tried to create a social equity program. Fortunately, they did this on the basis of race, and I say unfortunate because you have a higher level of legal scrutiny if you're identifying by race, and their court system struck that down. So they ended up not having it. But that was far from the end of different states trying this out, and municipalities. A recent state that made a lot of headlines about social equity was Illinois. And the way that their process was designed by their legislature was that you would get a huge points bump, essentially the best you could do if you were not a social equity applicant was supposed to be an 80, a B minus on this graded application. And you got this big bump if you did social equity. And they had social equity broken into 3 groups, which you're going to hear about again in this presentation. The first being you or a family member being arrested for cannabis. The second, spending a certain number of years in a disproportionately impacted area. We'll talk more about what that means in the New York context later. And the third, if you employ enough people that are falling into one of these groups. Illinois' program, as many people have written about, has been mired in controversy. And a huge issue in the core of what they did over there is that the legislature might have designed a good program. The regulators turned it over to third-party grading companies, who turned it over to another set of third-party grading. And this created a lot of problems, which meant a lot of lawsuits, which meant that they gave the applicants who didn't have perfect scores initially many opportunities to get perfect scores to push the whole thing into a lottery system. In the Q&A, you can ask if you want my opinions on lotteries. They're not positive. Spoiler alert, I think they're racist, in fact. So I'm not into that. I think that, we should give the licenses to the best possible groups, right? Anyway, the Illinois was seeing that a legislature can try to get it right and that regulators can screw that up, calling a spade a spade. But we have seen success in other places. Oakland is a municipal example of this, where they had a similar provision of having at least 50% going to social equity applicants. What this did is really spur non-social equity groups to go out, find, fund, support social equity groups. And we're seeing more and more in that in the cannabis industry at large, of non-social equity groups trying to help social equity groups get in, which is sort of a core idea of equity versus equality, right? And Oakland's program unfortunately ended, though it did have a lot of successes. Massachusetts is an interesting place because they decided to try set aside licenses for social equity groups. Part of the issue there is that they set aside delivery licenses, which have the lowest, sort of total income potential of any type. But just because of that criticism, I don't think you should call it a failure. Ultimately, New York is in a great position to get it right. They have a law that is these goals, and a lot has been left to regulation, which we really should see as an opportunity. So let's look at what we do know in that. First thing is that here's the actual language from the bill, which Joe helpfully pulled out for us. If the applicant qualifies as a social and economic equity applicant, or they set out a plan for benefiting community and people disproportionately impacted by enforcement of cannabis laws. Now, here's the section 64, line 30, page 37, that's actually at. I'm going to encourage everybody to actually read the law themselves. This section, also, I think in the 50s, there's more details, and let's talk about some of those details. So we have this initial thing of they have a goal of about 50% of all licenses going to these social and economic equity applicants. Goal is an interesting word, right? It helps decrease some of those litigations like Ohio saw, but what does it mean, right? And what is a social equity applicant? So to qualify, they have these large categories. And we're going to need more definition of what they are exactly. But from a community disproportionately impacted by the enforcement of cannabis prohibition, you heard me talk about that earlier in other states. Minority owned. What minority means is going to be very interesting, right? For example, in New Jersey, in their medical round, people of Arab or Persian descent did not qualify as a minority. I don't remember if Asian did or not, but sometimes Asian is, sometimes Asian isn't. Women-owned business, well, that's pretty straightforward. Disadvantaged farmer is an interesting one, absolutely. And certainly one of those groups of a wider umbrella that we want to make sure are included in the idea of social equity. And service-disabled veterans. Now, I do want to throw out a little note here that if you're interested in this to answer some questions, that they have already made some specifics around transfers. That for social and economic equity plan participants, you're not going to be able to transfer within the first 3 years unless it's to another qualifying social equity applicant. And you're going to need, approval of the board. After the 3-year, they're going to allow it, but you're going to have to pay back any discounted fees you got. That's not the end of the story here and what we already know, though. There's an extra priority provision that they are directing the regulators to put extra priority to people with past marijuana convictions, their self or their relatives. And what's a relative? That actually has already been defined, so that's good. If you live in these economically distressed areas or places where cannabis criminalization has been enforced in this, discriminatory manner, and if the income of the applicant is lower than 80% of the county median of the county they're in. So you social equity applicants on here in Westchester, that's good news. Yeah. Depending on what your income level is looking like. Now, Joe, I'd love for you to fill us in more on why it was written this way.
Yeah, I'd be happy to. And there's further definitions about ethnic the definition of social equity applicants further in the bill. But it's just a 128-page bill is all we have. So let's as brilliant as Greg is nationally and helping companies get into the regulated adult use cannabis space. In New York, we don't have the regulations yet. We just have this 128-page bill. If you haven't read it, you should. We'll be happy to send it to you. But as Greg said, you're either a social equity applicant or you're a social equity or you'll have to have a social equity plan in your application. Now, New York is one of a kind. From the Erie Canal to Wall Street to the Bronx Bombers, we do things big here in New York. And Crystal Peoples-Stokes and Liz Kruger and technically Governor Andrew Cuomo did big things with passing and signing the MRTA. So to get to your question, and by the way, it was passed in the Senate 40-23 and in the Assembly 100-49 along party lines. Why was it written this way, to answer your question? Because there's been discrimination in the enforcement of marijuana laws for almost a century. And specifically, the fact is that African Americans and Hispanics have had and are still having their lives ruined for selling this ultimately a plant, while others are making a fortune selling it legally, and it's not right, it's not fair, and it needs to be corrected. And that was the intent of this bill. Business Insider reported that white men comprise 70% of the C-suite at the 14 largest publicly traded cannabis companies by market value in the US and Canada. That's Business Insider. Fewer than 2% of cannabis company entrepreneurs or CEOs are Black, according to Leafly. In New York State, they're going to assure that 50% of the licensed operators will be social equity applicants. And, you know, we applaud the state for that. It's a novel attempt at righting wrongs. And if I'm a lot of you, I'm saying I'll believe it when I see it. But as this slide also says, a large share of tax revenue will be allocated to education funding, drug treatment, and community grants reinvestment fund to help communities unfairly impacted by historical unequal enforcement of drug laws. The MRTA continues to go on and say the board, in consultation with the Cannabis Advisory Board and the Chief Equity Officer, shall also create an incubator program to encourage social and economic equity applicants to apply, and if granted an adult use cannabis license, permit, or registration, the program shall provide for direct support in the form of counseling services, education, small business coaching, financial planning, compliance assistance. And although the Cannabis Control Board has not been appointed, there is good work being done by groups in New York State, like the HOPE program in the South Bronx, run by Damian Fagan. The HOPE program will be a business incubator to teach the cannabis industry, educate future cannabis business owners, and provide support for them to win licenses and build successful companies. The last thing I'll say about the MRTA is where I started. If you haven't read the bill yet, you should. It's 128 pages. Some of it is not necessarily related to you. It's related to medical cannabis or to industrial hemp or hemp extract. And ultimately, if you're interested in securing a cannabis business license, I would get real serious about doing as much as possible pre-application as you can. And I'm going to put a little bit more information about the HOPE program in the chat now. You know what? I want to just say one other thing about that. If you are a social equity applicant, you can have your license fees reduced or even potentially waived. And again, you're going to get they're going to supposed to offer assistance with putting your application together. Again, we don't have the regulations to see. I can hear some of you already say to me, Joe, they don't even have the Cannabis Control Board appointed yet. Wishful thinking. The ship has sailed. There is an Office of Cannabis Management. This bill is signed in law. Kathy Hochul, as Alyssa well pointed out, does want to make this potentially one of her first crowning achievements as governor, and so she should. And that's it. I think we're going to the next slide.
Yeah, Joe, before we dive into this, I'm so glad you did bring up the incubators. And it's great to hear that, we have private folks already working on incubators and the government trying to, set that up. Because, we have seen that in fits and starts in different places. And I think that seeing both at the same time can really lead to a lot of success. Where, we see folks like, the HOPE program being able to get people started before that incubator from the state really comes, or, assistance from the state. And that there's some things that, we're talking about mentioning today, right? But this is just an hour webinar. And if you are somebody who's really interested in this and wants to get going, again, to your point, yeah, the office is set up. There's information you can get. You should be involved, but get involved with folks like the HOPE program. Find all the information you can now. So, just really, really valuable information you're giving out there. So yeah,
And Greg, not to interrupt you, but we just saw this morning that Senator James Sanders from New York City was hosting an event with the Cannabis Hub, potentially creating a new program, educational program down in New York. So follow Senator James Sanders and what he's doing down there.
Great. And if you're a New York resident and you're not in James Sanders' district, maybe mention to your state representatives, hey, look what this guy's doing. I really like that, because we get those going everywhere. So yeah, back over to you, Joe, for talking about matchmaking.
Oh, matchmaking. Matchmaking is the secret to success. This program in New York will have a first round of applications for licensees to begin the program, right? There will be a first group, the pioneers, the frontiers folk that are the first round of legal cannabis operators in New York State. You should be amongst that group. Others certainly will be. They're working with Park Strategies and Canna Advisors and a host of other consultants getting ready as we speak. Any book you read about starting in the cannabis industry talks about building your team, and that's how Park Strategies and Canna Advisors ultimately got together. As Greg pointed out at the beginning of this, we were matchmaked. I don't know if that's a word. But Park Strategies helps our clients, our cannabis clients on the ground with government relations, business development, community relations, relationship management, and other what I call blocking and tackling and navigating through this new period with legal cannabis in New York. And that's through all the help with Alyssa and our other friends in the cannabis practice group at Park Strategies, Tom Buchan and Tom Wickham. Canna Advisors was actually recommended by one of our current clients to team with. They were already working with Canna Advisors. And since then, a number of our clients now use Canna Advisors for financial modeling and creating their business plans. I do not get paid to say that. That is a genuine commercial for Canna Advisors. And we're finding a lot of authentic value by working with them. Whereas Alyssa and the Cannabis Practice Group and I are experts in New York State and government and policy and so on. We do not know the larger legal cannabis trade like Greg does and Canna Advisors does. So we are proof that you need to do matchmaking to be successful in this space. If you're not a social equity applicant, if you are not a social equity applicant and are creating a social equity plan, the thing we've learned is our advice is one of your first partners or teammates or your first hires should be a chief equity officer. If you are a social equity applicant, there are people who want to invest in your company and partner on a license. I'll say that again. If you are a social equity applicant, there are people who want to invest in your company and or partner on a license. What's that mean? You need to network with them. You need to get out and about. You can't let cannabis networking events that are 50 miles away stop you from going to that event. You have to do that. Now is the time. For instance, the New York Cannabis Growers and Processors Association, founded by three visionaries, Alan Gandelman, Kalen Cassiter, and Andrew Rosner. It's a big tent statewide cannabis advocacy association. Why am I bringing that up? We represent them and we proudly represent them, but they are currently hosting networking events for their members to meet with New York cannabis growers and processors across New York State. Right now, there's events going on. Why? To network, to build teams, to matchmake. And my last point on matchmaking, don't start community outreach, your political outreach, your investor outreach when the applications come out. Let's say January 2022. You'll be behind and you should be doing all that stuff now.
Yeah, absolutely, Joe. What great points you made there. And, we over here at Canna Advisors, have that national perspective and, have been through it a lot, but you've heard these valuable things multiple already on this webinar today, right? Why it's so important to have local strategic groups like Park Strategies. And if you're already here and know about Park Strategies, let me tell you, you're lucky. Because in working in other states, it's very rare that we find partners of this quality. I mean, you've heard about the HOPE program already, right? Breaking news today that's local. You have to have folks looking out for this kind of stuff for you in your locality to stay ahead of it. And a huge element that Joe pointed out there is, you got to get to those networking events, right? You got to be meeting other people. If you're not a social equity applicant right now, you want to be building that team. And that's not just to build that team to, try to be in the goal 50% part, to try to get the reduced fees, these other things. You're going to be facing a diversity of problems and issues and headaches. And you need a diverse team to address those with a diverse group of viewpoints and backgrounds, and we've gotten there. So whatever work you've done now, and you're looking around the room, if all the faces are the same, you probably need to work in some different color in there. Not just for the sake of having a multicolor looking faces, but because those people are probably gonna have different experiences. They're gonna help you be able to solve different problems. The other important thing is these are folks, and this is starting to move into the watch out, that you're going to be working with for years. Try them out now. Figure out what works and what's not. You might meet somebody at an event. It seems like you work great together, and very quickly you're seeing, issues, hiccups. You don't like the same kind of properties. They're pestering you for stuff that you just don't think is important right now. You're pestering them, and they just won't give you a resume. I say that one because boy, do I hear that problem a lot. Oh, we're going to work great together. It's going to go great, but they just can't get you a resume. Well, that's a pretty bad sign that when it comes to you needing something like filing your, renewal application, that they might not get in time, right? So feeling these folks out and seeing how well you work together now before stuff gets stressful is really important. So, in that you're building this team, right? And you might find folks that just either side, you're looking for capital and you find somebody who seems just great, but they want 70% of your company, or you want to bring in a social equity CEO when you're not social equity, but they want to control way too much for you. Don't give away too much. Make sure that this balance in the beginning is going to work for you. I've seen this happen all too often, that folks do give away too much in the beginning to get that person that they feel like there's never going to be another one. And the bitterness can come up quickly, right? Why am I doing 90% of the work if I have 5% of the company kind of feelings? Now, maybe you got good reasons to get 5% of the company and do 90% of the work, but be happy with that in the beginning, right? Understand what your boundaries are, and don't be flexible with them. And it's fine to right now be figuring that out. Which gets into this, you can't make more time. I've worked with teams that have, almost no money whatsoever, that got started early, and they turned in far better applications than my clients who were literally billionaires, who thought, that they could come in with a month or two before an app and throw endless money at this to get it just out the door. And at the end of the day, yeah, you can't make more time. A couple concrete examples of this. Your money might be infinite, but land and people are finite, and the best ones are getting taken early. So when somebody finds that perfect property in Manhattan, and their dream is a cannabis business, it doesn't matter how much money you have, they're not going to give it to you. Again, this industry is a little bit different in that people are pursuing their dreams here. In that same vein, these folks that you meet in industry events who are these just stars, and they're going to do great, they're hearing what I'm saying and what other folks are saying to them today of they're going to find the team they like, the people they like, and you're not going to be able to pull them out of that. Plus, they're going to be heads down working in community groups, so you're not going to meet them anyway. So you need to get involved now. You need to get your ground game going. And as Joe said, you've got to be reaching out, making these community connections sooner rather than later. You also don't want to do that when you're not formed yet, right? You want to be their trusted cannabis, person. You want to have the answers. If you don't know anything about cannabis right now, it's not ready yet to jump in. Now, you can supplement that very quickly by bringing cannabis experience onto your team, but take those steps, right? If you're meeting with financial folks and trying to raise money, make sure that you have answers for how much you're looking for what the ROI looks like, right? For what your team looks like and what your strategy is for getting ahead, for getting that extra priority. I like to say that nobody in this sort of watch out area, it doesn't matter what your experiences are, what your money is, you can get this together through your passion, through your connections, you can line stuff up as long as you have, the time and commitment. But you can't, you can't be sitting back and waiting for the help that the state's going to give you to fill out your application to get started, right? And, we're in a situation in New York where communities cannot ban cultivations and processors, but will be able to ban dispensaries. Alyssa, Joe, am I right on that? Anything I missed in the finer points there?
No, and I know Alyssa is going to address, kind of like, examples of building, your community outreach, et cetera, later.
Yeah.
Not to steal a point from Alyssa, but obviously, if you can, and you're building your relationships with the community, say you're in New York City, say you're in Midtown Manhattan, and you got to deal with a community board, and there's community organizations around, and so on. You want to build those relationships, you want to build rapport, build trust, and potentially get them to write support letters to include in your application. So that's not stuff you can do when the applications come out.
Absolutely. And I'm gonna take a very rare question from the chat, because Cherish Baker, you reminded me that I needed to talk about this in the watch out. So what are the key people to have on your team in the beginning of your dispensary? And again, everybody, throw your questions in the chat. We're going to answer as many as we can at the end, and the ones we don't get to, we'll shoot around to email. But here's how I like to break down the team for dispensary and for the others, is that you need somebody who has legal cannabis experience in the type of business you want to go into. This is the first bucket. The second is you need folks with community connections in the community you're setting up in. This is, you're hearing examples of why, but this is just so crucial. You can't skip it. And third, you need people who know how to actually run a business. This is the biggest failure. And I guess I'll watch out here. I see in the Colorado market of you had people who are passionate, who are connected to their community in cannabis here, but don't know how to use QuickBooks. Can't get payroll done on time, can't avoid compliance violations. So if you are somebody who's saying, well, I check all three of those boxes, I don't think you want to work that much though. So, that's an 80-hour week for years. So figure out what boxes you do want to check, fill in for the gaps you don't have. If you're not a I got a one moment. That was really interesting. Y'all can still hear me? Oh, never heard that before from the Zoom voice. Anyway, so, if you're not social equity, get a chief equity officer is one of your first hires. If you're an out-of-state person, get Park Strategies involved to be figuring out your community connection folks, right? If you have legal cannabis experience, then you may want to join a team that checks off some of these other boxes. But those are sort of the three big categories of team building that I would talk about. And then sort of, social equity is this thing sitting on top of it. Money is this thing sitting on top of it, that play into those team factors. Yep. Okay, and let's move on to talking about community support action plans. So again, I'm going to talk about this from a national perspective, a good idea perspective, and then I'm going to turn it over to Park Strategies so that we can get into a lot more of the details of how they think this should work in New York. So whether it's an app section or not, I can tell you it's super important for a lot of reasons. This is a new industry. Like, we're not going to pretend that it doesn't have some sin associations with it. I hate that term, but it is the common one sort of thrown around, right? Alcohol, tobacco, cannabis, gambling are these sin things. So you need to be a great community partner. You need to show your community that you're going to be connected to it and helping benefit it. This is in small and big and right in your property and in your whole community and state kind of ways. Few concrete examples of that. You picking up trash around your dispensary is going to make you a better community partner, right? We're going to talk later some examples of why having excellent outdoor security cameras makes you a good community partner. Studies have been done, peer-reviewed academic studies, that land prices around a dispensary in a historically impoverished neighborhood go up after that dispensary comes in. And it makes sense, right? You're increasing foot traffic. You have a safe presence. So 7-Eleven wants to set up there. Then there's a 7-Eleven, and Chevron wants to build a new gas station there, right? Taco Bell says, hey, this is a great neighborhood for us. So you increase land values of surrounding people, you increase how nice it looks. You can jump out to talking to, the wider community, that you need to do donations. That takes time to form relationship with nonprofit groups. Once you can take your money, if they have federal grants that ban it, you need to figure out that conversation now. And, not only well, let me also say, plenty of these groups will say, sure, we'll take your money, but anonymously. Not okay. You need to find groups that you can publicly say who you're giving to, and that they can publicly say back. Other important aspect of this, you might need these folks to come speak in support of you at a variety of different meetings and venues. And I like to say that you can pretty much guarantee, no matter where it is or when, that there's always going to be about 4 moms who are very opposed to what you're doing and are not going to listen to any of your points. And you want a whole stable of community leaders to come say, no, I do support these people. I do believe in those people. Those can be from law enforcement, from former government positions, from nonprofits, right? From the religious community. There's so many community people who, if you come in shaking hands and explaining what you're doing and how many jobs you're bringing and how much safety and how many property value you're increasing and all the ways you're going to help out, that they're going to show up for you if you have those conversations with them. But I mean, none of this is going to go anywhere if you don't know your community. So park strategies, I think it's time to turn it over to you to learn a lot more about that. And let me know when you're ready for me to flip to the next slide, Alyssa.
You can flip over if you'd like. Thank you. So here, how to prepare for, meet with, and move the multiple layers of government that impact cannabis. So under Section 76, there's a requirement that the applicant has to inform the municipality that the licensed facility or real estate for the cannabis industry is located at least 30 days, but not more than 270 days before they submit their application. So you're already, notifying them when as we've said previously, as Greg had mentioned, be prepared, have the knowledge, have the education to be able to talk to them when you're notifying them. We just because an area hasn't opted out, it doesn't necessarily mean that they're going to give full support. They could still provide little support or no support to the applicant. And you want that, you want it. You want to be in cooperation with with the municipality. So the role of the municipalities in New York, they can actually submit an opinion on behalf of the applicant. Could be good, could be bad. This is why we're talking about having these conversations now, because that opinion letter or a letter of support, you want it to be support. You don't want it to be listing all of these major concerns that you weren't prepared for. You didn't know that they had. So if you're having the conversations on a regular basis with, like I said, your municipalities, you have, local boards, law enforcement, community groups, elected officials, all of them, you're going to be aware of what their concerns are. You can talk through with them. That way, when your application goes in, you're already either addressing them or you've already relieved them, making them feel better about their concerns, that they're not raising it. Because also with the Cannabis Control Board, when they're issuing a license, if the municipality has actually put in a letter of opinion with issuing, putting concerns out there, they have to describe and explain how they've addressed the issues that the municipality has raised. So like I said, if you're having the day-to-day conversations with them, you can eliminate all of them, or you can actually help provide a smooth process for the Cannabis Control Board to be like, hey, we didn't need to address this concern because it's already listed in the application. It's already in the community action plan. So it kind of gives you a little bit of a leg up when you're submitting your application. Municipalities, they're not the determining factor, but I mean, if you're in a locality and you haven't spoken to them, they've issued letters of concern, you still got your license, the amount of struggles after you have your license in that area they're unnecessary. That's why you take the time now to work with them and to build that relationship and cooperation. As a business, you're already going to have struggles. At some point, you're going to be busy. It's going to be great. but you don't want that hanging over your head that, you know, your government official down the road is going to be poking in, you know, looking for issues. So like we said throughout this whole presentation, start right away. You want to go in also to eliminate the concerns, but you're also educating them. So which is why we said you need to have the education, but you're educating them. You're eliminating the misconceptions, the stereotypes. You know, you have the location where you're going. There's the character of the community, for example. The municipalities and local officials, they don't want that disrupted. If anything, they want to make sure that you're going to come in there, you know, like Greg had mentioned, you're going to enhance the area. You're going to enhance the real estate. You're going to start building the community. You're not just going to be some storefront that's sitting there, but you're going to be working within the community to build the relationships, not just with the government officials, but the community itself. You're going to be bringing in revenue, creating employment. You want to bring this to their attention, and you know, it's almost like a sales pitch, but you also want to make sure that you know what their goals are, so that way you can help and let them know that you're going to be, enhancing and kind of supporting their goals by what your business is going to be bringing into the community. You know, there's a couple main points, you know, that, again, economic impact, you know, I talked about the employment and the revenue into the area. The other, Greg, you also mentioned, is public safety. You know, there's certain areas in this industry where, you know, you have fire chiefs who are concerned about, you know, butane fires or explosions. If your business isn't going to entail anything, you know, in that range, you want to let them know. You want to make them feel comfortable that, look, you know, we're not going to be operating that. We don't have anything, you know, we're not going to be processing or, but if you are, you want to show the safety measures that you're putting in place. You want them to be comfortable with that being located where it's going to be located. Same thing with theft. I know theft has been a really big topic that's been brought up, you know, with wherever these are going to be located. You want to make sure you go in, and this again, and you know, this will likely be part of the application process, but it's also something you want to bring to the municipalities and the community boards. You know, for example, you know, New York City, the community board. You want to make sure that you're showing them that you have exterior cameras, interior cameras. You know, you have security guards. You want to make sure that you're showing you're going to be putting the safety of yourself, the business, and the community on top of, you know, anything else. So that way they're comfortable, again, with you being where you're going to be, you know, setting up shop. So, you know, Joe had also mentioned, you know, the letters of support provided in your application. I'm going to reiterate that. This is what this is all about, starting now, getting those letters of support. It could be from community groups, local, you know, elected officials, municipalities. You want all the support you can get to help hopefully move your application in through quickly and smoothly.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'd love to give a couple of stories before we turn over for questions about some things I've seen in the public safety realm in particular. You know, one that first one I'll bring up is I was at a cannabis event, and sitting next to somebody whose, you know, body language was clearly, you know, they're not really into this. And I won't give away the city, but they revealed to me sort of grumpily that they were a police chief of an East Coast city, and you know, where sort of they were to learn more about, you know, how to enforce against these kind of folks. And I said, you know, a great thing we've learned here in Colorado, this was, you know, several years ago, is you know, first, all employees steal. Doesn't matter what the business is, right? All employees are going to steal. If you're an unregulated market, you know, drug dealer, you have few alternatives other than to kill that person, which is a huge hassle for the police. They have a murder investigation. You know, that's a lot of work, brings up violent crime statistics, all this kind of stuff. In a cannabis business, when that theft occurs, they have it from multiple camera angles. They have the employment file and the badge file that has the person's home address. And the police get an email saying a theft occurred. Here's, you know, the videotape of them doing it. Here's their home address. That's a very easy arrest for the police, avoids violent crime statistics, and frankly deters that theft in the first place because the employees know how much security is around. They're still going to try to get away with it though. And we have strategies to, you know, to try to further mitigate that. The big one is communicating, you know, how many cameras you have, not being super specific about how they work, right? Anyway, that he seemed receptive to it. And sure enough, I forget exactly the timeline, but a month or two later, suddenly that police chief was speaking to the city council about the need to decriminalize cannabis. So approaching these people, giving them, logical arguments about how things are working, can really make them a partner. Not that they necessarily start as an opponent, right, but can be neutral at best. That's changing. People are growing in support, but hearing from you firsthand what you're going to do in their community can really bring them some peace of mind. Let me give you another example of up and running shops. A dispensary here was having a normal intake day. So there's, dozens of pounds of cannabis flower coming in, spread all over. And a detective comes in and knocks on the door and says, there was a road rage incident in this area. I saw when I was walking it that there's a dispensary here. I know that you guys have great cameras. Can I look at them? And, comes in and sits down among these, bags of cannabis everywhere after signing the proper visitor forms and following the SOPs and going through their exterior footage to try to, see what they could pick up in their investigation of this road rage incident. And he was there for about 45 minutes and saying, boy, you guys, I can see this face in this. This is great. This is really helpful to us. And, can I send this all to myself? I don't want to keep bothering you guys. You're clearly busy. And said, oh, of course, send all the video files over to him to continue it. And, shook everybody's hand and said, I'm so glad you're here. This makes my life a lot easier. No jokes about the cannabis sitting everywhere, no complaints about that. So, our law enforcement officers want to solve crimes, right? And cannabis businesses can help them solve crimes that occur in the dispensary, crimes that have nothing to do with the dispensary other than its presence. And that's going to apply for any cannabis business that has, excellent security and, that helps everybody, right? And you can think of other contexts that get increasingly more creative in the ways that these cameras and these community connections can really help. Some other ones that are a little bit different, but just to sort of throw out there, are getting folks connected to addiction treatment. Cannabis is not a harm-free substance, but drug dealers aren't really in the habit of handing out, materials on how to get help. So, Park Strategies, are you guys ready for us to turn it over to question time?
Yep.
All right.
Sounds good.
Here we go. Final slide. All right, Lisa, do you want to send us some questions our way, and we'll figure out who to answer them?
Yes. The first question is: I am a low-income disabled veteran. How do I get an application?
I actually just took a stab at that, and first, thank you for your service. The application should probably be out just after the first of the year. I put in and responded to you with you should go and monitor the state's Office of Cannabis Management website, which is very easy to capture. It's cannabis.ny.gov. You won't miss a beat if you're monitoring that site.
Great. We also have some questions that actually came in via email prior to today's session. So one is, do you think that the fees to apply for an adult use license will mirror those for medical use, which is $10K to $200K? If so, how will social equity applicants be expected to handle this?
So I'll start this one out. I'm on mute. All right, why don't I start this one from a national perspective, and then Joe and Alyssa, do you want to maybe give some New York color that I might be missing?
Sure.
Great. So, traditionally I've seen these fees. I used to say, well, if we don't know, just budget 20,000. It's come down a lot. New Mexico, for example, they're doing sub 1,000 for a delivery license. In the low thousands, like 1 to 5,000 sort of for the application fee. Now that's a Western state that's smaller, so that might be on the low side for an application fee, sort of non-refundable, single digits thousands. And then the licensing fee may be more to the perhaps 10 to 20,000. Maybe the largest facilities might be more. Again, this is sort of a national back of the envelope guess. And we are in New York here also going to see some fee reductions. Isn't that right, Jim?
Yeah, there certainly could be some fee reductions, especially for social equity applicants. They could have reduced fees or waived fees for their non-refundable application fee and their annual license fee. But like, let's make no mistake, this bill was written for legacy operators in cannabis in New York State for the last quarter century, last half century. They've been growing, selling, and distributing, cannabis on the legacy market. This is not going to be $100,000 applications, and it's a fair question because in New York State, the medical marijuana application fee was extraordinarily high. But we're not talking about 10 organizations in New York State alone, like the medical marijuana program. We're talking about hundreds and hundreds of dispensaries in New York State, talking about hundreds of growers, talking about, all that. So what's my point? My point is they're not going to set the price outside of the range of people that they want to get influence into this program and into this program. My guess, and it's a guess, and I'm not, I don't have any forecast knowledge on this, but it'll be between 5 and 10 for an application fee, and probably maybe around the same or less for the annual license fee once you get your license. That's my prediction.
As Lisa tees up the next question, some quick historical context there. Some of the earlier programs, and I have a guess New York may have been this way, is the legislature didn't want to throw any money at it. They were sort of like, self-fund the whole thing by, your application fees, and they weren't sure how many people were going to apply, right? So the people writing it to pay their own salaries needed to make sure there was enough money in the coffers. So they picked big old fees, which cut out all the little guys. Yeah, so we learned that lesson, I think. Yeah. All right, what's next, Lisa?
Great. Here's a related question. As a social equity applicant, how much capital do you think one needs to have?
Let me take a stab at that.
Sure, Joe.
It's tough to say, so if I was putting myself in your shoes, if I was a social equity applicant, you're hearing business incubator, you're hearing low interest loans, you're hearing assistance, you're hearing waived and reduced fees, you're hearing assistance with your application. So what does that mean? You still need a store, and as Greg would tell you, it depends on the license that you're going for. You still need brick and mortar, you still are creating something. And the costs associated with that are always, I know you want to ballpark that, but it's, it's a real deal. If you're creating a distribution center, if you're creating a processing facility, if you're creating a cultivation facility, if you're creating a dispensary or 3, it's a serious endeavor. And sadly, because the federal government is still blind to the truth on this, you can't go get bank loans. So, they're dangling 50% of these licenses out to social equity applicants, and they better figure out a way to get them into their hands and not just say, oh, just because you can't get $250,000 together, you are not now going to get that license. That's not fair for the social equity applicants and the folks this bill, the essence of this bill is directed towards. For everyone else, I mean, it's the price of doing business, and in New York State, depends where you are. If you're in Brooklyn or if you're in Granville, it's 2 different prices for retail and everything else. So where's Granville? You have to ask Alyssa.
Yeah, and just to throw out some sort of national, really back of the envelope rough numbers, total price of this thing, and this would include something that we call the minimum cash position, worst day of your business when you've got payroll, you paid all your licensing, you built out the whole facility, you paid for your product if you're manufacturing or dispensary. We want your bank account to still sit at about 10 to 20% of your total. And that's, for example, Illinois that I was talking about, those applications went in January of 2020, and today is the final lottery to award them. If you've been sitting on a property since then, you'd be happy if you listen to our advice on the minimum cash position. So thinking about that, payroll, needing to have operating costs into your profit pool. We think a dispensary hits around 800,000 to about 1.5 million to get going. That might be some sticker shock for you. And remember that we're talking, you've won the license. This is the total amount of money you need. It's not what you need today to get going, nowhere near that. For manufacturing, that's going to be about, I don't know, 1.5 to 2 million up to 6 million, because it depends what products you're making, right? If you're just doing hydrocarbon extraction and putting it in vape cartridges, you're on the low side. If you got 3 kinds of edibles and concentrates and 5 kinds of vape flavors, then we're talking on the high end of that. And a full-blown large-scale cultivation, we're talking $6 to $10 million. Micro cultivation, we can bring that number down significantly, but this is a large-scale agricultural business with huge industrial facility, large payroll staff. Your fence alone might cost $80,000 to go around a property that size, right? So that's big business over there. All right, what do we got next, Lisa?
Okay, next question. How would one know how to find out which areas in New York City, for instance, have had cannabis criminalization that has been disproportionate?
Hey, Greg, if you don't have any specific, federal, websites, FBI, data or, criminal data or anything, I was just trying to answer that question for you because it's a great question. And if you want, just email me and we'll connect. But it's a question I should get my hands on. Specific data, micro data on where these, disproportionate in marijuana law enforcement has been done. I think we know in particular where they are in communities of high minority population. That's just the facts of life, and not the Upper East Side, for example. But I would love to dig down on that. We represent a number of clients in New York City, and that's information we should be getting our hands on. It should be readily available to you. So let's work on that together.
Yeah, and I'll say that what I do personally when I'm looking for this info is talk to my Joe in that state, my Joe and Alyssa, because it's got nothing to do with the actual numbers and everything to do with where the politicians want it to land, and they'll back into what numbers they need for that, frankly. So yeah. All right. What's next, Lisa?
All right. Yeah, let's take at least one more and then do a quick time check. We have a question about, you mentioned the importance of matchmaking in the early stages. Do you have more information on programs or even events that would be more helpful?
So I'll take a stab at that one too, Greg. I follow New York City Normal on Instagram and elsewhere. They're constantly posting all of the events that are happening. There was a great immersive Van Gogh exhibit event in New York City yesterday. Happy Monkey put on. It was a great networking event. I've been to some great networking events that Medley has put on down in Tribeca. Ruben Lindo and his company Urban Couture are doing some events and did an event in Saugerties. There's one coming up in September in Albany. You got to dig out. You got to look for them. They're not going to fall in your lap. You got to go find them. I mentioned the New York Cannabis Growers and Processors Association is doing some farm and facility tours. I mentioned that Damian Fagan and the Hope program are doing some great things. Sadly, there's not just a centralized location giving you an event calendar. So it's need to find it. I would encourage you to join the New York Cannabis Growers and Processors Association so you don't miss a beat with that stuff.
Good, perfect answer. I got nothing to add. What's next, Lisa?
Do you expect the OCM to make cultivation licenses available for businesses that want to act as knowledge incubators for social equity applicants?
I don't remember reading anything in the law about that, so I doubt it. But if you really get involved with, public hearings and giving input, you can, along with the help of folks like Park Strategies, influence getting that kind of stuff written into the regs.
That's Paul, and Paul has got an amazing facility and operation. I'll get you better information on that. I know we're short on time, but let's touch base.
Great. Let's take this one last question, and then I think everything else will circle back with everybody via email for direct answers. But I think this might be in a lot of people's minds: is how will we combat the expensive real estate in New York?
Commercial, it depends where you are in New York. Commercial.
Yeah, that's how I was laughing.
Commercial real estate in New York City might be, a little bit easier to get your hands on post-COVID or mid-COVID or than it was pre-COVID. But yeah, I'll leave that to Alyssa. She's probably got better answer than I do.
Yeah, it all depends on where you are in New York. It's tough, you know, it's, right now the market it's crazy. And it's different all over New York. You know, so it's, again, I go back to, I'm a research girl, go back to research and just keep looking and comparing and, you know, that's somebody who's part of your team. You know, you want to get a good, you know, either agent or somebody who's going to be out there who knows the market that you're looking in, you know, to send you options. And I mean, that's a tough question because it all depends on where you are.
Now, I do want to throw out that don't think that that person who owns that land can't be part of your team. If you're trying to be in a part of town when you're not social equity applicant and you need social equity and you find a property that's owned by someone who is social equity, bring them in. You don't have to buy it from them. Make them part of the team. You know, kill two birds with one stone there.
Well, let me
Take a
just,
match.
Liza just made a good point. She said, venture out of the city, go close to the suburbs. You know, Alyssa talked about the opt-out communities and I think we addressed this, but communities have to opt out of the New York State program for dispensaries, on-site consumption facilities by the end of this year. And if you're going to do that by referendum, you know, the election day is the first Tuesday in November. So that stuff has to get to the Board of Elections probably the beginning of October, which is right around the corner. But some of these communities are totally opting out already. And so just keep your eyes on that too. And
Great.
You know, oh, Lisa, one last thing. I'm sorry, I'll be quick.
Yeah.
But don't consider an opt-out to be end forever, right? Folks like Joe and Alyssa are here to help you strategize how you turn that initial no to a yes. And like over in Jersey, they are on a tighter timeline. A ton of places there have been passing moratoriums and bans that are so interested in cannabis, they just don't want to say yes before the regulations come out. So you can help influence this stuff if you are talking to, you know, Park Strategies, who knows how to get in there, how to get the timing right. All right, I'll stop talking, I promise.
Great. Lots more questions. I know we could talk for a long time. I see questions about like when do you actually need to sign a lease and questions about CGMP facilities. So we will compile answers to all of those and email you directly for that.
thank you, Lisa. We couldn't have done this without you.
Thank you.
Absolutely. Well, thank you all of our participants for joining. Joe and Alyssa, such a pleasure. Thank you so much.
Likewise.
Here.
Yeah. All right. Everybody have a great week.
You too. Be well.
Yeah.
Everybody.